So, if you look here, you'll see this verse. It's a verse that's very dear to me. It says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear." And so, this is a verse that became very important to me a few years ago. It was my senior year of undergrad. It was the fall of 2015, November 16th to be exact. And this is not only when I hit one of the lowest points in my life, but it was when I came to the realization that I was entangled and bound in fear. And my life was literally being dictated by it. And so that night, I had physically harmed myself. And I was in Long Island, and I was away from those who were close to me. And being alone in my dorm room, I had just reached a very low point. I just reached my breaking point. And at that time, I just had nothing but overwhelming thoughts and feelings and just tormenting thoughts that I'd never be loved, thoughts that I wasn't good enough, just thoughts of loneliness and neglect. And all of these things, it was just my worst fear. And so for years, I realized that I unknowingly feared being left by the people that I loved the most. And I feared that other people would come along and take my place, and I wouldn't be as important as I once was. And I feared that I wouldn't have that family dynamic that I had longed for. And so all of these things that I feared, they stemmed from childhood experiences. And so that night, I remember sitting in the school's parking lot, and it was the same night of the incident. I was there with my mom and my pastor, and he spoke to me about fear and being made perfect in the love of Yahweh, or in the love of God. And it was at that moment that I became aware of fear in my life. And the more evident it became, the more I tried to fix it, and the more I tried to stop it. And it's been quite a journey since, but I can't say that I don't have my moments where I go into fear, but I can confidently tell you guys that fear doesn't have a hold on me in the way that it once did. And the reason being is because of love. And now, at that time, it's not that I didn't have a relationship with God. It's not that I didn't know Him, right? So if a lot of people knew what I was going through at that time, they would be shocked. Like, how would Maisha, the church girl, be the person to do that? But what had happened was, even though I had a relationship with Him, I had not yet fully grasped His love for me. And that was what caused me to get out of my dark place. And so when I look back at that point in my life, I realized that the biggest thing is what I feed my mind on a daily basis is important, because what my mind is fed, that's what it's going to produce. And I was so paralyzed in fear that I couldn't even enjoy the good moments. So even if I was having a good time, I was busy wondering, well, maybe it won't last for long, or maybe something bad is going to happen. And I always just subconsciously waited for the bad things to happen. And the one thing that I want to tell you guys is to not fear something so badly that you end up creating and fulfilling that fear. And so now I want to talk to you guys about what fear is. So fear, it is an unpleasant emotion caused by the belief that someone or something is dangerous, likely to cause pain or a threat. It's a strong emotion caused by great worry about something dangerous, painful, or unknown that is happening or might happen. And so, for me, the main part there is what might happen. And one thing that fear will never allow you to do is live in the moment. When I was in my place of fear, I always was wondering of what was going to happen and what had happened. It was always about the past and the future, never about the now. And so, one of the biggest things that I'm learning is to live in the moment, and fear normally takes that away from you. It causes you to focus on the negative things. So I was so focused on all of the bad things that did happen to me, and all of the bad things that might have happened. And so, talked a little bit about what fear is, and it's important for us to talk about where fear takes place. So fear takes place in our mind. So we see all of these things: fear, frustration, worries, stress, doubts, and shame. All of these things are taking place in our minds. And so in my process of overcoming fear, I had to learn that there was no conquering fear without changing my mind. And it didn't matter how badly I wanted things to change. It didn't matter how badly I wanted to be free. If I didn't change the way that I thought, I wouldn't receive the change that I desired. And it took me a while to understand this, and I'm still learning it. But for a very long time, I lacked peace of mind. And the one thing I want you guys to know is that peace is attainable. Peace is attainable. And so many of us, we lack peace because of what's going on in our minds. And I think about the scripture, Isaiah 26, verse 3, it says, "He will keep those in perfect peace whose minds are stayed on him." And your peace is predicated on what you focus on. Your peace is predicated on what you believe. And so many of us are living with tormenting thoughts because of what we are looking at and the lies that we are believing. And so it tells us that in Philippians, the 7th verse, chapter 4, it says that he'll give us the peace that surpasses all understanding. So in other words, there are some situations that we'll be in and we can't even imagine having peace in the situations, but he promises that his peace is going to go beyond our human intellect. And so we have to really grasp that idea. And even in John 14, verse 27, he told his disciples, "The peace that I give to you, it's not like the world." So there's this difference between what he gives to us and what the world gives to us. And one more verse that I want to talk about is Romans 12. We quote this verse a lot, right? "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." So what this is saying is that there is no change if your mind doesn't change. And I know sometimes we over-spiritualize this verse, but we can take this as just daily practices. What are you thinking about every day? What do you think when you wake up? What are your first thoughts? Do you journal? Are you having mantras? Are you going to counseling? These are daily practices and ways that you can renew your mind. And so what I want you guys to take away is that the key to living a transformed life is having a transformed mind. And so a lot of what I feared was based not only on what I thought might happen, but it was also my perception of what was happening. And so I want to talk to you guys a little bit about perception. So, perception, it's a way of regarding, understanding, or interpreting something or someone. It's a mental impression, a belief or opinion, often held by many people and based on how things seem, not as how they are, but as they seem. And so, unknowingly, my perception, it was a tool used for me to confirm that my fears were true and that they would come to pass. And it was so bad to the point where I would scrutinize every word that was said to me. I would try to analyze everything that everyone said, their body language, their facial expressions. All of these things made me hypersensitive. And I would analyze all of these things so I could confirm that the story would end the very way that I did not want it to end, which was me being neglected. And the thing is, it's not that I made these things up, it's that everything genuinely looked like neglect through my lens. And that's why it's so important to refocus your mind, refocus your lens, because what you believe in your mind is what you will see around you. And so, one thing that contributes to our perception are words. So here I have, words are powerful, and negative words are gateways to the distortion of your perception. And so, we have to be very careful about the words that we say and the words that we receive. And so one of my favorite verses is John 6:63, and it says, "The words that I've given you, they are spirit and they are life." So that tells us that there are spirit words and that there are death words. And so what words are used to tell stories, right? And so what stories are you creating with your words? And so it also tells us in Proverbs that life and death are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. And so the question that I have for you guys is, if your words could physically feed you, how healthy would you be? Would you live or would you die? And that's how we have to think about it, right? So one thing that we have to be very careful, and the reason why so many people are depressed and anxious is because they received words from others that were lies. And you must be very careful about the words that you receive from other people. You can't just allow anyone to speak over your life. You can't just allow everyone to say these words to you, right? So let's look at it in the natural and the physical. If someone is allergic to peanut butter and someone tried to feed them peanut butter. Let's say I'm allergic to peanut butter and someone's trying to shove a spoon of peanut butter down my throat. I'm going to get extremely defensive and I'm going to tell them, no, stay away from me. I cannot take what you're trying to give me, because if I let that in, if I take that in, it is going to harm my body, and if it harms my body, I have a chance of dying if I take what you're trying to give me. And it's the same thing with our minds. There are just certain words where it's like, I can't accept what you're telling me, because if I accept it, if I take it in, it is going to do harm to my mind. And it's the same thing. There are a lot of things that we can look at the physical that describes how we should be mentally and spiritually. And then there aren't only words from other people, but the words we tell ourselves. Some of our worst enemies, we are our worst enemies sometimes. And the main thing that you have to do is replace what you hear. So for example, if you wake up and you have these negative thoughts, if the thoughts that you're hearing in your head, or if you're telling yourself, I am ugly, don't say I'm not ugly. Replace it with something else. Replace it with the opposite. I am fearfully and wonderfully made. I am beautiful. And that's one thing that I had to learn, to not go back and forth with my thoughts, but to replace what I was, the negative with the positive. And so what you think is what you believe, and what you believe is normally what you say. And what you say and believe is what you live out. And so what is your life, what story is your life telling? And that's normally going to be a reflection of what you're thinking. And so to close out, our verse that we're focusing on today, that Labria came up with, is Philippians 4 verse 8. So it says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, and it lists a whole bunch of other things, but then it says to think about such things. And I think the reason why Paul said to think on what's true, because there is a large possibility that the people who he is writing to, that they were surrounded by falsity, they were surrounded by lies. So if we're being commanded to think on what's true, then that means that maybe there are lies surrounding us. And so one thing that I want you guys to take away is that thinking on what's true takes intentionality. You have to be intentional. One thing that I have up here, it says, acknowledgement without application is dormancy. So in other words, you can be aware of something, but if you do nothing about it, you still remain the same person, and you still remain in the same state. So for example, let's say that I went out to work, and then I went to the gym after, and I stink. I realized that, you know what, I do not smell good. I smell funky. This is not a good smell. And I'm just walking around my house, I'm watching TV, but the smell is following me and I'm aware of it. But if I don't do anything about it, I still remain stink. Now I have to use what I know. So it's like, okay, how can I not be stink anymore? I know then that I have to go in the shower, I need to scrub myself, I need to get down and dig into what is causing me to be stink. And when I do this, then that's when the change will come. And so now that's the same thing with us. It's good to address that there are things that have traumatized us and that hurts us, but what do we do with it? And so that's why we need to learn what works for us. What are some of the things you enjoy? Does writing help you? Does singing help you? What is that thing that will help you bring about change? And so the last point that I want to give to you guys, the answer to that, is to just be intentional. Be intentional about your thoughts. Be intentional about what you let in and what you accept. And so that's all that I have for you guys, and I can take a few questions at this time, if you have any.
Like, how long did it take you to get to like that place where you felt like you were strong, like you could speak words over yourself, you're not like going back and forth?
Right, so I can say that I haven't mastered it yet. However, it took time. I can't remember an actual like time span. I feel like it just happened over time, but it took a lot of work. So for example, counseling. I had to learn how to speak. I kind of held everything in. So doing things that I know would help me. Dancing. So it was just, I didn't realize the time. It was just a matter of what I was doing with my time, a matter of how it goes away completely, but it's a matter of how you deal with it in a positive way that it's not interfering with your daily life. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other questions?
Okay, I'll ask. What are the steps you take daily to be intentional? Because sometimes it's hard every day to be intentional about your actions and you go through emotions. How do you remind yourself
a great question. So one thing that I personally do, whenever I'm off center, nothing feels right. So some things that I do, I have to journal. And I'm very adamant about writing. So I have to come up with a routine. So when I wake up, I know, okay, on my train ride to work, it's like 30 minutes. Those 30 minutes are going to be dedicated to me writing. And it's not, whatever comes to my mind, I know that I have to write that down. Also, I'm very big on devotionals, right? So if you guys have the Bible app, you can find things that relate to you. And they'll ask you, like, how are you feeling today? So if I'm feeling sad, I'll press sad, and then it'll show all of these plans that can, show me how I can get through that. So definitely waking up, and another thing, having mantras. So for example, if I know that I'm not feeling good enough, I'm going to tell myself until I believe you are good enough. And in every moment of the day when I don't feel that, I know, like, okay, you have to say this. So then if I keep doing it and keep repeating it, I start to believe it and live it out. And then it goes back to the power of our words. So I'll say finding your thing. Journaling is mine, and I will encourage you to do it. Reading, writing, drawing. So finding your thing and being intentional doesn't mean that you won't be affected, but it's you being affected but still saying, okay, let me try again. Does that answer your question? Yes. It's on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, there you go.
All right, thank you. What was the deciding factor for you? You said one day you realized that you were really walking in fear, or that you were entrapped with fear. What was the particular thing, if you can share that made you say, okay, I'm drowning in this?
Yeah. So I felt like it was that night when I did actually hurt myself in my dorm room. And what's funny is that it wasn't some major event. It probably was something very small, but it was everything that I didn't deal with. And that's why it's so important to deal with emotions as they come, because these were things built up from years ago. And so it was just that one little drop. Maybe I felt like, I don't even know what happened, but I think it was just something very small, and it just like made me explode. And that's why I'm so adamant about being aware of your feelings, because then you end up in a place and it's like, how did I get here? You got here because you weren't being aware of your feelings and the things that hurt you. And so for me, when I hit that moment, it was just like, whoa, where did this come from? And since then, I've had to go back and trace a lot of things. A lot of what I dealt with was in my childhood. And I think you mentioned earlier, one of you two, that a lot of things you don't realize the trauma until afterwards. Trauma isn't always so apparent. And so a lot of things that led to that moment was from when I was like 7 or 8 years old, and it caught up with me. I had no idea. And so that's why I'm so adamant about helping youth and adolescents and little children, because you're at a very sensitive age and it really plays a role in who you become. Thank you. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you feel like it works better for you to schedule out all your time, or is it better for you to give free time? And also, like, when you were in...
I'm sorry, can you repeat the first question?
Do you feel like it works better for you to like schedule out all your time to make sure like you're always busy, or is it better for you to give yourself a lot of free time?
So one thing that I learned this summer is that, and this is personally for me, if I get out of my routine, I am not my best mentally. So I'm a teacher, and I worked over the summer, and I had 2 weeks off, and those 2 weeks off, I realized that I got out of my habits of waking up and writing. I got out of my habits of waking up and reading my devotionals. And when I did that, I wasn't my best. However, I don't like plan it to the T, like, okay, at 9:15 to 9:20, I'm gonna do this. And then, so there's planning, but not so dramatically. But I do better when I am in a certain space and following routines. You had a second question?
Yeah, and like, do you feel like it's better for you to surround yourself with people to feel better, or is it better for you to like seclude yourself?
So not all company will help you. So it's a matter of who you're surrounding yourself by. Because I can be with people who are around me and they're contributing worse to how I feel. So just because you're with people, it doesn't mean that you're going to feel better. So it's a matter of who you're around. And a lot of people, they'll say, you know what, I feel really lonely, let me go hang out with people, but not realize that they're contributing to how you're feeling. And so my thing is, if you're not helping me, you're hurting me. So please be very mindful of who you're going to. And now I'm starting to appreciate and value alone time, because for me, and again, this is my personal experience, I realized that I had this like codependency, and I have had to learn to not stand on my own, but really get this together before I worried about these relationships. And I had to realize that sometimes when I went to other people, that I was kind of giving them the position that only he could have, and I was expecting them to be for me things that they could not. And whenever they couldn't fulfill what I wanted them to be, it would just hurt more, and it would be a never-ending cycle. And so there's a balance. You should have the time where you're okay with yourself and you're having your moments of meditation and quiet, but then still being surrounded by people who lift you up. Community is very important, so there's a balance. Any other questions? All right, thank you guys for your time.